Welcome to the first episode of Father-in-Law. We are hoping to unleash a series of insightful, informative, and bit of entertaining. After all, law is fun, and we need to unpack it and simplify it and bring it to the ordinary folk. And as I indicated in the promo, we are going to be inviting subject matter experts as our guests to help us unpack the various topics that we'll be covering. So our first topic, as we debut, has to do with GBV, gender-based violence, and we chose that to kick off the series with because we are in August, which is Women's Month, and my guest is a dear friend, an ex-student. Can I say that?
Yes.
And Nthabiseng, who is now an advocate, very well-rounded colleague. Started off as a prosecutor for many years, and now you with the bar. So you are now on the other side, representing Skellems.
Yep.
Well, cheers, Nthabiseng, and
cheers.
Yeah, I was given strict instructions that because it's a fun show, we need to do what we do. So pardon my holy waters. So Nthabiseng, how have you been? What have you been up to professionally and otherwise?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. You've just referred to my experience as a prosecutor. Do you know how I started being a prosecutor? You know, sometimes I think things are just set out for you from the beginning. You may think that you'll take a certain path and that this is what I want to do, but circumstances will throw you off into a different direction. I remember a dear friend of mine, she was raped by two guys while she was jogging. And when I heard about it, I went to see her in hospital. When I got there, she was swollen all over the face. She had been badly beaten up. And I asked her, I said, what happened? You know, who are these two guys? She wouldn't talk to me. She was just crying. I didn't know what to do. I felt very, very helpless. After she was discharged, she was on medication. She was seeing a psychiatrist. After she had been discharged, she said, you know what, I'm going to spend Christmas holidays with you. So I'm coming to your house. And that was our last conversation. Afterwards, I think she overdosed on those pills. That incident affected me. And I think it made me get into activism of saying, you know, certain things are wrong. You know, women cannot live like this. Women need to be protected. This is uncalled for. This woman ended her life at such a young age. She was 22 at the time, and she had been attacked while she was jogging. You know, women have a right to be free, to run, to exercise, to do whatever they want without the fear of being attacked. That sort of ignited that fire within me, even though at the time I didn't realize it. You know, when I finished school, you know, you go corporate and then you think, oh, okay, my life is set. But something within me still said, you need to do something. This is not where you're supposed to be. And that's how I ended up, you know, applying to the prosecution. And immediately when I got there, I was just thrust in that division of the NPA when it started, and it had that, they used to call it SOCA, Sexual Offences and Community Affairs Unit. And that's where I was. The Office of the National Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, you know, had just been established. I think Bulelani Ngcuka was there.
Yeah.
He is the National Director of Public Prosecutions. So immediately, you know, I joined that unit. And from there, my path was just set. It was as if this is what God created me for, you know, and I just did it. And I did it with a passion. I did it with a commitment. I just felt that I am there to protect women, children, those that are vulnerable, who do not have anyone to protect, who do not have a voice to speak, set out, you know, how they feel, what has happened to them, and just laid out there. And that's why I was so successful, you know, as a prosecutor in getting those convictions. And I remember each and every case that I did.
Wow.
As if it happened yesterday. And that was 17 years ago.
But what difficulties, you know, looking back 17 years, lessons learned, what do you think could have been done better in instances where maybe you did not get the convictions? Because you get involved at the very late stage. From the date of the incident, someone would have had to go to the police to have it reported, and then the docket gets brought to you as a prosecutor. You may send it back if you're not happy with the nature of the evidence contained up to that stage. And I'm sure there were instances where you knew in your heart of hearts that people that got off ought not to have gotten off. Can you take us behind the scenes so that people can understand from the unfortunate and detestable rape incident, what should happen? How does a matter end up with you? How does a matter end up in court? How does a matter end up in a conviction or an acquittal? Because society out there would focus on the final outcome, which is whether a person is found guilty or not guilty. If he's found guilty, is he sent to court, to jail for a long time or whatever the case may be. But people don't understand the process through the entire value chain. I know I'm one of the bad guys in a sense that I represent people who are accused of all these offenses. And remember, we live in a constitutional democracy and everybody is presumed innocent until found guilty by a court of law. But I'm a father.
Yeah, true.
And I would never support any form of violence perpetrated against women, children, or any less privileged, as it were. But today is not so much about what I do in the defense of those rights. I really want to focus on how best we can assist the law, as it were, the entire value chain, so that we rid society of people who ought not to be living amongst our own, especially those who violate our women and children. So just to break it down hypothetically, Miss X gets raped or gets violated. She doesn't even know whether it's a rape or how to classify it. But any violation of anybody's person ought not to be encouraged or tolerated. So just take it from there.
With rape cases, your only winning formula is the truth. Just the truth as it happened.
I wanted to chip in there because you're making a crucial point. I understand if someone has a presence of mind to report an incident now. As I understand, we need to try and preserve the DNA or any samples. So presumably, as far as possible, try not to wash it away, and so that the police can then do whatever they have to do. But in many instances, they don't report it at the same time or soon after it had happened for fear of reprisals. They could be embarrassed, or sometimes they do go to the police, but the reception they get with the people they are first in contact with sort of puts them off, and then they end up going home, and then they will take a shower because they want to get this filth, off their bodies. But am I right in saying, even if that has happened, that does not mean that's the end of the matter?
Yes.
Because the truth of what had happened still remains. 20 years later, you can still testify about the same thing, but there may be this other piece of evidence that may not be there. But it can still be possible if your story is supported by other objective facts to still lead to a conviction. Did I understand you correctly?
Correct. So you must remember, with the Sexual Offences Amendment Act, in fact, the legislation that deals with the prosecution that makes certain offences prosecutable, mainly the Sexual Offences and, Related Offences Act, specifically makes an exception where a rape complainant would tell somebody else, the first person that I confide in regarding what has happened to me, that is admissible.
Oh.
That information is admissible. It's an exception in that regard. That if I tell a friend, if I tell my mother, if I tell my aunt, if I tell a teacher in school, if I tell anyone, the first person that I'm going to disclose to, that person can come and just testify and repeat what I've told them. That's number one. Number two, I can understand. If a person has been attacked, you still have the smell of that person on you. You want to wash it away. You want to wash away what has just happened to you. Yes, we encourage women not to do it because we want to preserve that evidence. But sometimes all is not lost, even if the bath or the shower has happened. They will tell you that the experts that deal with forensic evidence and collect the forensic evidence, that DNA will stay in a person for a period of 72 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So even if a person is showered, though it reduces DNA or the amount of evidence that should be collected, but still there is a possibility of salvaging whatever has been left on the woman for the police to do their swab taking and even fingernails. Perhaps the victim was fighting, scratching the person, under the fingernails. Those nails can be cut to see if there's any skin underneath.
Oh, yes.
Yes, it will all depend on what the victim is telling in his statement.
Yes.
Hence, I said your only chance of getting a conviction, your only weapon to win a rape case is the truth and the story that the victim says. Step by step, every information is crucial. If it happened at the park somewhere, where exactly, what had happened, you understand, so that wherever that incident has happened, DNA can be collected there.
What happens in a situation where the incident was not violent? And what I mean by that is you have women who are married and they will say that my husband raped me. But that's a very difficult thing to prove because it becomes a he said, she said, and chances are you guys are, in a sexual relationship because you're married. How do you then prove it?
There's no difference, rape is rape. Sometimes when it happens, people that are married, they call it marital rape. But still, it is rape. The same rules apply. So let's be careful not to say that because it has happened between a married couple that it was not violent. Rape is violence in itself. It's a violent act.
What happens in a situation where the incident was not violent? And what I mean by that is you have women who are married and they will say that my husband raped me. But that's a very difficult thing to prove because it becomes a he said, she said, and chances are you guys are, in a sexual relationship because you're married. How do you then prove it?
There's no difference, rape is rape. Sometimes when it happens, people that are married, they call it marital rape. But still, it is rape. The same rules apply. Perhaps semen has been collected. The man might say that it was consensual. This is my wife. But the strength of the case is in what the person is presenting to the court to say that. But I didn't consent on this day. This is how it has happened. I didn't consent. This person strangled me, this person beat me up, this person coerced me. So the strength of the matter is in what the complainant says and who she has told, reported to, and the demeanor of the person that is telling the story. Because it's very important, to check the person's reaction after the incident.
Yes. But you see, here's a complication. I accept that rape between strangers is one thing, but as I'm listening to you, that there is also high incidences of rape amongst people that are known to each other, that have dated, that are married. Now, at what point does it become a rape? Because sometimes as men, we tend to think that if a woman has played along, you've been courting, you jump to bed, you play with each other, and she says no. She could be saying no when we actually think that she's saying yes. I mean, we jumped into bed, we both naked, we've spent the whole day together. People have seen us together. You came to my place, jumped into what are you doing in my bed naked? But I understand that if she says no at whatever point, anything that happens after the no takes away the consent, and definitionally then that qualifies as rape. Would I be correct if an ordinary Joe Soap thinks that way? Because we need to disabuse men of the notion that because we're dating or because I bought you a couple of drinks and we had a cool afternoon and early evening, it does not mean my no is any less of a no.
Exactly.
Just because we have some form of relationship. I mean, you've spoken about a married couple. If my wife says no, I should understand that no means no.
Yeah.
Even if prior to that we're active, we've done it 100 times that week, but if she says no at this point, it simply says she is not consenting to anything that I would do once I've verbalized it. But what happens if she doesn't verbally say no, but she perhaps acts in a manner that says, I'm pushing you away, I'm not keen. How do you, because there it's in a bedroom, it's just the two of us, my word against her word.
The minute a woman says no and doesn't want to do it, all right, from the definition itself, all right, it is the fact that there was no consent, all right. You cannot import consent and say that just because this is how I behaved and therefore there was consent. Immediately, even if I change my mind in the middle of us being naked, there is no consent.
Even if you consented to the initial penetration, a couple of strokes down the line, you say no. The subsequent stroke is a rape. You pull out at that moment.
Out. If I say no, I don't want to continue with this, I don't want to do it, then you pull out.
Okay.
You understand? It just because a woman had said yes to the foreplay, the playing, being naked, going in there, if she decides to say, listen, I don't want to participate, I don't want to do this anymore, don't do it.
Okay, that's very important.
It constitutes rape. But at the same time, remember what I said initially. It is up to the decision of the prosecutor whether the prosecutor will go ahead with the case. All right? Looking at the entire statement and the contents of the docket to corroborate the case.
Okay.
All right?
Another difficult one is when you're dealing with children who are not necessarily well trained or who may not testify as well as they should because they're children. It does not mean that because they don't have a voice that the legal system should fail them. How do you take care of a child, a 6-year-old? We hear about horrific stories of 3-year-olds. How do you make sure that they tell their story in a truthful and consistent manner, keeping in mind that courts are by themselves very intimidating environments, even for adults?
Yeah.
What more of children? Because they too are on the receiving end of this atrocious acts of these men who just can't keep it zipped up.
You'll be surprised. Children were my favorite witnesses.
Wow.
I loved doing cases where children were complainants. Children will be your dependable witnesses because they do not flinch, they do not change from their stories, they don't change their mind. They will tell you exactly what happened. How we protected children. Number one, a child doesn't know how to take an oath in court, so you will have to go through the process of checking whether this child understands the truth, the difference between truth and the lie. So a simple question: Zola is wearing a blue shirt. Is that a truth or a lie? And the child will tell you, no, that's a lie. That shirt is this and this color. I'm wearing a pink shirt. No, that shirt, that top is not pink, it's white. So you investigate the ability of the child to tell the difference between the truth and the lie, to check the competency of the child and whether the child will understand what they're going to testify about in court. Number two, children will go through a process called court preparation, where you will have designated volunteers or individuals that are working within that court environment. In Protea, we used to have a center that was donated and manned by the Teddy Bear Clinic. So where you would have individuals who would have puppets like this, dressed as court officials, presiding officer, and they would role play to say that this is the attorney, the lawyer, this is the prosecutor, this is the presiding officer, this is the court orderly, this is a court clerk, so that children will understand the setting of a court environment.
So you simulate it.
Yes, to say that the judge is listening, the prosecutor is asking you questions. When the prosecutor has finished asking you questions, the lawyer for the person that has done this to you is also going to ask you questions. When no one is around in court, children will then be taken into that court setting. Okay, to be shown that's where the presiding officer is going to sit. But remember that we have a section in the Criminal Procedure Act, 170 capital A, all right, which makes provision for children under the age of 18, right, where you can make an application that the child will suffer undue mental stress, all right, because of the nature of the evidence that they're going to give, where a child can testify in an adjoining room, and then we can observe the child
via closed circuit.
A monitor.
Yes.
You understand?
Okay.
When they testify, okay? And there, that section specifically talks about an intermediary, all right? An intermediary is a person that will be able to understand the language of the child and understand the language of the court, and then sort of speak to the child in an informal way.
Okay, and then relate back to the
Yes.
court.
It's not interpreting,
Yes.
but it's using exactly the language that the child is using. Because let me make an example. When I had Afrikaans complainants, children,
Yeah.
maybe from surrounding areas that were speaking Afrikaans, you know, they would refer to their private parts as a bada. A bada means a frog. You understand? Xhosa children will refer to ikapechula. Ikapechu means a cabbage.
Yeah.
You understand? So you have a presiding officer that is white. You speak about a cabbage. What is a cabbage?
Yeah,
So
you won't understand, yeah.
Yes. So an intermediary is there knowing that the child speaks in that language and what it means.
In fact, a person from Lesotho will refer to it as Lesotho.
Lesotho,
la.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
then
Lesotho,
Lesotho is
yes,
a
exactly.
country.
Yes, you know, my daughter is, was raised and looked after by a lady from Lesotho. And then, she would say, "Ke hlapile Lesotho."
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah,
Up until I also,
got to understand that.
Yes,
So context.
Context.
Yeah,
you
it's
understand?
very important.
And, exactly. And what the child is talking about.
Okay.
So in that regard, there's an intermediary speaking to the child. There's an interpreter in court. You understand? But the child doesn't get to see the perpetrator, doesn't get to be intimidated by the court proceedings.
Yeah.
They're in this room that is full of toys, but they understand that in this room, this is where I am going to tell the truth. And what I loved about children, during cross-examination, because the lawyer, me and you now, will say, my client's version is that this has never happened, but you are lying, this has happened. And you'd find the child standing up. You understand?
Yeah.
Really stating their story.
And you can tell, as a presiding
tell.
officer, you're sitting there, you're monitoring the demanner.
Exactly.
And human beings.
Yes,
you are trained
exactly.
to pick these things
Exactly.
up.
And to
No,
see
I
that
get
the
it.
child is not egotistical, the child is not, sort of exaggerating and that demeanor, that child being a child, being herself. Some children will testify from beginning up until end in tears because this was such a traumatic event, but they will tell it as it is. Hence I'm saying that children were my favorite witnesses more than women, grown women.
Oh, okay.
Because they will tell the entire truth. I remember this one case, hence I said earlier that I never forget my case.
You're quite passionate about this.
I am, I still am. These two kids that were raped by their own dad, on New Year's Eve. And the mother didn't want them to testify because the father was working and that was their only means and source of income.
Wow.
So if the father was in prison, who was going to look after them? It was quite a difficult situation because the mother didn't want to bring them to court, wanting the father, to be freed. And here are the children that were strong enough to tell the court what had actually happened and testify about the entire. The one was 7 and I think his sister was 9. Those children, after they testified, I think it was the 9-year-old or she was 10, she looked at me and she said, I will never come back to this place again. I'm going home to the Eastern Cape and I'm going to put this behind me. I've told what has happened to me and my sister and we're gone. And the father was convicted and sentenced, I think, to 33 years. It just shows you that our circumstances as black people, our socio-economic background and what we have to go through, we would rather forego the fact that, when that child said to me, it meant to me she was freed. She freed herself. She took her power back by speaking about what her father said. And she said, I'm never ever coming back to Johannesburg again. I'm going home. I think they were from Mount Frey in the Eastern Cape. I'm
here's their
going home.
mother who's supposed to be their protector.
Exactly.
She chooses to protect financial support, forgetting that the trauma that these children have suffered at the hands of this bastard, who is supposed to be their primary protector,
Exactly.
is no justice is done for the children. And you're right, it's socioeconomic circumstances, but as society we need to look beyond that. No man has a right to violate a child or any woman, no matter what the circumstances. And I think that's the message we're trying to drive. But we also need to educate society and show how sometimes we can fail ourselves. Can you imagine if, in this case, these children were not strong enough? That bastard could have been freed.
Could have been freed. Or the mother said, don't go to court, but don't tell, don't tell what he did.
Or don't tell the truth.
Or don't tell the
Change
truth.
your script, like you're saying, the truth is your primary weapon, your most important weapon. Have you come across instances where complainants complain about the treatment they get at the police stations? Because the police to whom this matter is reported and how they record what is being reported is important. Because as a lawyer, I know I will get people off because of the inconsistencies in terms of what they say under oath in court when they testify and what they said under oath at the time when they made a statement. And if there are material contradictions, it may well result in an acquittal. I'll be happy as a lawyer for my clients, but that's not what we're about. The issue is to try and see how do we strengthen the whole judicial value chain so that justice is not only seen, it's not only done, but seen to be done, but we as society also play our role. So from the complainants, the police, the forensic examiners, just about everybody else, the prosecutor, the other witnesses, and ultimately to enable a judge as a trier of facts to say objectively, I am convinced that this person did what is accused of, or alternatively, if there is a doubt, the accused person is entitled to that benefit. So I just want to find out, where do you think the weaknesses are at the point of the police themselves? Are you satisfied that the police to whom these rape cases or these incidents are reported are properly trained, they have the necessary sensitivity? The structure of the police stations, is there a room where people can talk privately about this? Because I cannot imagine that rape victims or people who have been subjected to these horrific incidents should stand in an open place and talk about, relive their experiences within earshot of other people who are there for different reasons. I would imagine that on its own could also be a turn-off. But what's your take on that?
So then when I was a prosecutor, things worked differently. I'll tell you why I'm saying this. If a statement was taken by a police officer, say at the client service desk, you could see the differences from a statement taken by a detective that has been trained and sort of been skilled to deal with cases that involve gender-based violence. So then it was still called the FCS, Family Violence and whatever unit. There was a time when it was called the Child Protection Unit, and then it became FCS. So then when you saw that statement, then you would say to the, write in the investigation diary, please retake A1. A1 in the docket would be the victim statement, right? And then everything, and then as a prosecutor, give instructions, retake, do this.
So guide the
investigation, and all of those will be done, because, the one at the client services will not necessarily be trained to do everything that the one at FCS, the detective, will be able to do. But at the same time, those at clients, services, they were also sensitized and conscientized that when a woman comes or a child comes to the police station to report, there would be a separate room where they would be taken and the statement obtained. And, sometimes also they would go for training to say that these are the things that should be done. And also there were those centers like at Krisani Baragwanath, they called Nthabiseng Matsau, where you would have police officers. Their statement would be taken, everything, the investigation, including forensics, everything else.
At the hospital?
At the hospital itself. So it was a multidisciplinary type of a place where everything could be done and a victim could feel free.
One-stop shop kind of a thing. You don't have to go to a multiplicity of places and re-explain yourself. And
yes, they call it secondary victimization, because you tell your story so many times. There, it happens at once, After the forensics have been done, your clothes have been taken, everything else sealed into a bag, sent to forensics, you'll be given a new set of clothing, you understand? Because there was that understanding that this person might not want to still be in the same clothes that she was wearing when she was attacked.
Interesting.
Then That's how it used to happen. Now things are different. Why I'm saying that? Recently, I had a client, she was a victim of domestic violence, and this man keeps on violating, the interim protection order. So I typed and did the statement and wrote down the statement exactly in accordance with the act and what she was saying, how this man has violated. We got to the police station, Florida police station. The officer at the client services, a woman, refuses to take her statement. Says, no, we must take the statement that we can write.
And you can see this person doesn't have a coat of the brain for that.
She writes 2 paragraphs, only 2 paragraphs.
For a rape or for some form of violation.
No, for the domestic violence. I have about 3 typed pages that I have compiled.
And there's nothing in the law that says they must take the statement themselves. I mean, if you are a victim and you are capable of writing your own statement, you write your own statement.
Mm-hmm. I was so upset because now she was fighting with the complainant, all right, and telling the complainant, I'll pray for you, I'll come fetch you and take it. Now she's deviating from why we are there. You understand? She's now making a judgment call.
And a mockery of
exactly. It. And she can't take the statement, but she insists on taking the statement. We have a statement so that we minimize the time that we're going to spend at the police station and minimize the time that she's going to sit there and interview. You understand? Because this is not easy for this woman. She's already been traumatized and suffering this abuse from her husband.
That's a good point you make.
You understand?
Yeah,
and there she is wanting to start the story all over again. She cannot even make out ABC of what she's... Because she's not even clued up on the Domestic Violence Act.
And there may be problems with the language as well. This one is speaking in Sesotho, and she's trying to translate it
Tonga,
into...
you understand? Yeah, and she's speaking over the complainant, not even giving the complainant a chance to speak, you understand? Comes the warrant officer, what is the problem? I was livid. And I said, this cannot be. This woman is not trained. She doesn't know what she's doing. What do we get? Oh, we are so sorry. I said, it can't be that you just say you're so sorry. Skilled police officers. Police officers these days are not skilled.
But that's the point. Because, and what you've just said, can you imagine if they remonstrated with her in the presence of a senior advocate, a seasoned person who knows the journey of these victims? What would have happened if she was alone? They would have just gone to bugger off, go away. And it's women who you would expect them to be more empathetic. But these are real life issues that we need to change. We need to change that narrative and say, as society, we need to collaborate with each other so that we can defeat this monster. We as men must stand up and say, not in our name. Certainly, I'm nailing my colors to the mast. Not in my name.
Not in my name.
A no is a no. Let's then conclude by asking you this. Does it matter what the instrumentality of the penetration is? Does it matter whether the penetration is through a finger or a bottle or whatever? How does the law define rape in simplified terms? Because my sense is that many men are probably committing rape out there daily and sometimes without even realizing. And I'm not making excuses, but I know for a fact that the definition of rape has been changed, and I want you to oversimplify it for the benefit of our viewers.
So it depends, right? If I stick my finger in your ear, that would not constitute rape, even though it says that rape, is the penetration, but it depends on the instrumentality of it. What instrument? So if a man takes his penis, and inserts it in an orifice of the body of a woman, the fact that penis, it's part of what is erotic in the body and what is the intention behind it, that will then give the prosecutor that room to make a decision whether they will charge for rape or not, because there's also the issue of sexual assault. Let's say that a man then sticks his tongue in your ear or your mouth without your consent. That constitutes sexual assault.
Okay.
All right. And then, if a man behaves in a manner, sort of touching your bum, your breasts, that constitutes sexual assault. But then, different sections regarding how the offense was committed will dictate on what you are charged with.
Okay,
you understand?
I get it.
With an offense, perhaps, that will also make you believe that you will be sexually violated.
Okay, yes.
You understand? If a man sticks his fingers in your vagina, that constitutes rape without your consent. Or if it is done to a child, because remember, a child below the age of 12 cannot consent.
Yeah.
Yes. So Men tend to think that by doing that, that doesn't constitute rape. And they go, oh, when they realize that they're facing rape charges.
Yeah, so guys out there,
Yes,
is
exactly.
bad enough.
It is bad enough.
You will
It is
go
the
to
same.
jail
You
for
will
a
go
long
to jail
time.
For a long time.
All right.
Yeah.
I have a question. What happens in the event of anything under 18, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is statutory rape, correct?
Not under 18, but
I think
under
it's
the age
16.
of 16.
Under 16. Okay. So what happens if they're both quote unquote kids? Like it's a 14-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy.
So in that regard, remember there was a section, if I'm not mistaken, it was declared unconstitutional, where you sort of prosecute sex between two teens. It stemmed, I think, from a case that I did a while back. These kids from Jules High School. The girl had a lot to drink, and these boys also were drinking. There was sexual intercourse, and then there was a whole uproar on media to say that this girl had been gang raped at school. But then it turned out different. The National Director of Public Prosecutions at the time made a decision that they must be prosecuted for an offense which makes it illegal for teenagers to have consensual sex, which eventually was declared unconstitutional. You understand? Sex between teenagers, to punish sexual intercourse between teenagers. But I think the ages below the age of 17, whether it was 16, 15, I can't remember, but I stand to be corrected.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's 17 and 14, it's borderline. So if it's 18 and 14 years, you would look at statutory rape. 17, 16, 14 and 15, it's borderline.
Yeah.
It's a decision that the prosecutor would have to make.
I'm asking this because I think when you're still a child, you don't actually understand what you're doing. And most of the time, kids are really experimental, they're naughty, whatever. But sometimes it's the older boys, like the boys in matric and the girls in grade 8, they're excited, they're finally in the high school. And these boys, they're a little bit older. So they have an idea of what they're doing, but I don't think they fully know the consequences of what they're doing. And you also don't want to I don't like making excuses for men at all. But if you are a 17, 18-year-old boy, I don't think your brain is fully developed. I don't think you understand the extent of what it is you're doing. Do you think that the language that's used at schools when it comes to sex ed should change? There's a lot of slut shaming, which is also another thing that makes these girls not want to come out and tell their stories. All of these teenage girls that are pregnant, yes, it's members in the community, it's your fathers, it's your uncles, it's your teachers, but it's also these teenage boys. So how do we then hold them accountable? Because these are the men that then go into society.
So I'll tell you what. With statutory rape, the section itself is meant to protect those young girls that even though they've consented, but the older one, all right, because of this other one is older, then preys on this
On the
younger,
little ones.
yes, on this younger one because she's younger. Probably going gaga, this is a handsome boy, very popular in school. Maybe 20 years, 19 or whatever. That would not necessarily go for girls his age, but would go on to younger girls. But then the issue of consent is a problem. So that's why they call it statutory rape, because this other one is older, but has had sex with a younger one.
Regardless of whether those younger
Yes.
girls may have said yes.
Yes.
Because in
Yeah.
terms of the law, they are simply unable to say yes.
Yes. Because you need to understand that these things then will manifest in years to come, in that it was easy for him to have sex with somebody younger, and then it may happen. So in that case, instead of sort of prosecuting that young man and ruining his life for the duration of his entire life, you put him through that diversion course. I think it's for 6 months with any other organization that will work with young offenders, not necessarily giving him sort of a previous conviction, but trying to correct the behavior of what has happened. And also, it's good to also involve the victim, and school them in that regard, that this is what a diversion program means, meaning that you don't shut them out. They also become involved in the process. so that they understand why you've taken this decision and why you've taken this step.
And if the behavior is repeated, then what's
so
next step
if the
after that?
behavior is repeated and you've been through a diversion course,
Yeah.
when a diversion course doesn't necessarily mean you've been acquitted, we can still resurrect those charges, bring back those documents, and now you'll be facing 2 charges.
And I guess you can't expect the law now to show you some leniency
Yes.
because you've squandered that opportunity. It's like you're becoming a repeat offender. So, yeah, okay. Then, as we close, what is your advice to men out there? What is your message to men out there? What is your message to women out there? To children out there, which would enable the judicial value chain to deliver justice and to deliver justice in the right manner, right in a sense of dealing with the perception that the law doesn't care, because the law does care, but we each have a role to play, I would imagine, to make sure that the final product is one that will make sure that we rid society of these predators.
We have wonderful laws in our country. Our constitutional is a wonderful document, and our laws are very protective of women and children in this country, including men themselves. But law will never fix gender-based violence in this country. It goes back home. It's how men think about women, how they raise their children. If I have a boy and a girl, and then I decide to make my daughter wash the dishes, and then my son should sit back, it gives that impression, and that it sort of says to my son that he is the most important one. He's a man. He's allowed to do certain things, and women are just subservient. And this is where the problem starts. It's how we raise our children and how they view women, how we raise them, how to view women. You understand? And in that regard, how we raise our children to not see women as objects, because it's the power. Gender-based violence stems from we men trying to have that power over women. That's why we use words such as toxic masculinity. They want to prove themselves as men, and they objectify women. And to them, it's grand. It's an achievement. I got that girl. I gave it to her good. I beat her up. You know. I will never be dictated to by a woman. It's those kind of beliefs and values and, skewed principles that actually make men to be perpetrators of violence. So that mindset needs to change. It needs to change. And that filters through on how the criminal justice system will actually serve society. With that comes this secrecy, this veil of secrecy, to say that when something like this has happened,
Keep it hush-hush, keep it in the family.
Keep it in the family. Let's discuss it. Let's solve it within the family. And then it's never brought forward. And then when it's brought forward, it has so many holes in it, and that nothing can be salvaged out of it. Let's solve it in the traditional Sesotho way. I'll come and pay a goat and some chickens.
And meanwhile, a child has been violated.
You
What
understand?
rubbish is that?
Yes, what nonsense is that?
Yeah.
Also, because we are so poor and indigent, when somebody offers money, we'll be quick to take it. You understand? Forgetting the repercussions and the consequences.
And say to the child,
yes, and
hush,
say
hush.
to the child, you'll go on with your life, not knowing that if it has happened to a young man, a little boy, that little boy is going to grow up doing it to other people too, because it has happened to him. Psychologically, it has affected him to such an extent that he will think that, okay, fine, now I can do it to other people in some very, messy way. You don't know what triggers a person to behave in that manner, but when you trace it back, it has happened to him before. So our whole sort of values as a society, they need to change.
Yeah.
They need to change and support all of those that are coming to court. Yeah. Make sure that, we lift this veil, and we encourage women to speak. We encourage women to say that the justice system is there to protect you. We need to employ it to the police. The police need to skill themselves.
Yeah.
Because what is currently happening, it's unacceptable. They need to be there for women. They need to protect them at all costs, to protect their children.
But we, as active citizenry, must not outsource our responsibility, because the people who are perpetrating these heinous crimes live within us. They're our brothers,
Exactly.
they're our friends. And we must also make sure that we raise decent young men, because they'll be tomorrow's husbands, they'll be tomorrow's uncles, and they themselves must also inculcate that type of respect if we are to win this war.
Indeed.
I think parting short personally and as the father-in-law is to say to the men out there, not in our name,
Yes.
our women deserve to be loved and cared for. Our children deserve to be loved and cared for. If you are a real man, do the things the right way and let us protect our women. No excuses. Thank you very much. In future, Nthabiseng, I'd love to prick your brains on polygamy versus polyandry. Food for thought, but yeah, it's a topic that we'll be covering.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. It
I
was
see
so
you,
nice. No,
you
it's
finished
not-
your drink.
I enjoyed my drink this time.